This man captured 53 enemy warships with a crew of 54. Most people think naval warfare is about who has the biggest fleet, the most guns, the largest crew. But the truth is one man proved that genius beats firepower every single time. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this sailor terrified the most powerful navies on Earth, why his own government had to destroy him, and why his tactics are still classified by modern militaries. What happened to him? It'll make your blood boil. 1800s, the age of sail. Britain ruled the seas. And there was Thomas Cochrane, a nobleman's son who didn't just fight in wars, he invented new ways to win them. 53 ships captured, hundreds of battles, outnumbered in every single one. But here's what they don't tell you in history class. Britain didn't celebrate him, they destroyed him. Picture this. May 6, 1801, the coast of Spain. A single British ship, the HMS Speedy, 14 guns, 54 men. Facing her, the Spanish warship El Gamo, 32 guns, 320 soldiers. The Speedy was so small, her deck was barely 4 feet above the waterline. Cochrane, just 25 years old, couldn't even stand up straight below deck. 6 feet tall in a ship built for children. Every naval expert said the same thing: run. You don't fight a ship 7 times your size. Cochrane didn't run, he attacked. Here's what he did, and this is verified by Spanish naval records and British Admiralty logs. He sailed straight at El Gamo, then at the last second, pulled alongside so close the Spanish couldn't lower their guns to hit him. Their cannons were aimed too high. But here's what No1 tells you about this fight. Cochrane ordered his men to paint faces on pieces of canvas and prop them up around the deck. From a distance, the Spanish thought the Speedy had 3 times her actual crew. This wasn't just tactics. This was psychological warfare at its finest. Cochrane understood something most commanders never figured out: your enemy's fear is more powerful than your weapons. Modern special forces call this force multiplication. Cochrane invented it in 1801. The Spanish tried to board the Speedy. Bad idea. Cochrane had greased his deck with oil and soap. Spanish soldiers, in full armor, hit that deck and went down like dominoes. Sliding, crashing, completely helpless. While they were slipping around like cartoon characters, Cochrane's men, who knew the deck was greased, boarded El Gamo from the other side. 15 minutes of pure chaos. Cochrane himself took a musket ball to the back, kept fighting. Sword through his leg, kept fighting. By the time the smoke cleared, the Spanish captain was staring at a 25-year-old bleeding from 7 wounds holding a sword to his throat. El Gamo surrendered. 54 men defeated 320. One tiny ship captured a warship 7 times its size. Naval historians still use this battle as the textbook example of impossible victories. Here's why this matters. This wasn't luck. This wasn't even bravery, though Cochrane had that in spades. This was a system. Cochrane fought like he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He saw the battlefield in layers: what the enemy sees, what the enemy thinks, what the enemy fears. Then he weaponized all 3. And that El Gamo victory, that was just his warm-up. What he did next made the Royal Navy question if they'd created a monster they couldn't control. Because Cochrane had a problem. Britain loved winning battles, but they hated when their captains got too creative. And Cochrane, he was about to get very creative. 1809, France. Napoleon's fleet, the pride of the French Empire, sat anchored in the Basque Roads, heavily fortified, protected by coastal batteries, boom defenses, and shallow water that made them nearly impossible to attack. 11 ships of the line, these are the battleships of their era, each one carrying 74 to 120 guns. The British Admiralty had one order: destroy them. Problem: every conventional attack would be suicide. You'd lose dozens of ships just trying to get close enough to fire. So the Admiralty did something desperate. They called Cochrane. Cochrane looked at those French ships and saw something no one else saw. They weren't protected by their defenses. They were trapped by them. Here's what he proposed, and this sounds insane: load old ships with barrels of gunpowder, tar, and explosives. Turn them into floating bombs. Set them on fire. And sail them straight into the French fleet in the middle of the night. Fire ships. Now, fire ships had been used before. Small ones. Controlled ones. But what Cochrane designed, according to British naval records, he built 20 explosion ships, each one carrying 1,500 barrels of gunpowder. To put that in perspective, that's enough explosive power to level a city block. And he was going to float 20 of them into the enemy fleet. April 11, 1809, 2 a.m. Cochrane himself took command command of the lead explosion ship. Think about that. This man could have sent sailors to do it, could have stayed safe on his command ship. Instead, he sailed a floating bomb into enemy territory himself. The plan: sail as close as possible to the French fleet, lock the steering wheel, light the fuses, which gave you exactly 15 minutes before the ship exploded, then row like hell back to safety. Cochrane's ship, the lead fire ship, got within 200 yards of the French line, locked the wheel, lit the fuses. 14 minutes to live. They rowed. The French saw the burning ship coming and panicked. Here's what happened next, verified by French naval reports. Cochrane's explosion ship detonated with a blast so massive it was heard 30 miles inland. The concussion wave shattered windows in nearby towns. A mushroom cloud of fire and debris rose 200 feet into the air. The French fleet broke formation. Ships cut their anchor lines, which meant they were now drifting freely. They crashed into each other, ran aground, completely exposed. Let me tell you what makes this absolutely devastating. Cochrane had turned the French fleet's greatest defense, their protected harbor, into a trap. They couldn't maneuver, couldn't escape, couldn't defend themselves. And here's the part that military historians still study. Cochrane only used 4 of the 20 fire ships. 4. That's all it took to scatter Napoleon's entire fleet. Modern naval doctrine calls this asymmetric warfare, using minimal resources to create maximum chaos. Cochrane did it in 1809. Now here's where this story gets infuriating. Because Cochrane had just handed Britain the greatest naval victory in years, the French fleet was helpless, grounded, ready to be destroyed. All the British Navy had to do was finish the job. They didn't. Cochrane watched from his ship as the sun came up. The French fleet, 11 massive warships, sitting there like targets in a shooting gallery. And the British Admiral, Lord Gambier, refused to attack. Cochrane signaled, "The enemy is vulnerable. Request permission to engage." No response. He signaled again. Nothing. For 7 hours, Cochrane begged permission to finish what he started. Gambier, safe on his flagship, said the tide wasn't right. The wind wasn't right. It was too risky. Meanwhile, the French were frantically refloating their ships. Cochrane watched, literally watched, as the greatest opportunity in naval warfare slipped away because his own admiral was too afraid to act. Want to know the crazy part? This moment, this right here, this is where Cochrane's story stops being about naval battles, and starts being about something much darker. Because Cochrane did what heroes aren't supposed to do. He told the truth. Here's what you need to understand about 1800s Britain. The Royal Navy wasn't just a military force. It was a political machine. Admirals were noblemen, connected to Parliament, to the king, and they did not appreciate being embarrassed by a 30-year-old captain who kept making them look incompetent. When Cochrane returned to England, he expected a hero's welcome. Instead, Admiral Gambier demanded a court-martial, not of himself, for refusing to fight, of the officers who criticized him for refusing to fight, including Cochrane. The trial was a farce. British naval records, which you can still read today at the National Archives, show that witnesses were intimidated. Reports were altered. Cochrane's own testimony was lost. But here's what makes this absolutely insane. Gambier was acquitted, declared a hero for his cautious and prudent leadership. Meanwhile, Cochrane, the man who actually won the battle, was called reckless, insubordinate, a threat to naval order. He wasn't court-martialed yet, but the message was clear: shut up, follow orders, stop making us look bad. Cochrane did not shut up. He got elected to Parliament, and he used that platform to expose everything. Corrupt admirals selling promotions to the highest bidder, naval contracts going to incompetent shipbuilders who bribed officials, sailors dying from diseases because the Navy pocketed medical supply budgets. Cochrane had receipts, names, dates, bank records. He stood in Parliament and accused sitting admirals, by name, of corruption. And the British establishment panicked. Because Cochrane wasn't some nobody they could silence. He was a war hero. The public loved him, so they couldn't just arrest him for speaking out. They had to destroy him another way. 1814, a financial fraud scheme swept through London's stock exchange. Someone spread false rumors that Napoleon had been killed. Stock prices exploded. Then the truth came out. Napoleon was alive, and the market crashed. Whoever started the rumor made a fortune, and the government arrested Thomas Cochrane. The evidence against Cochrane, circumstantial at best. A man claiming to be a French officer had visited Cochrane's house the night before the rumor started. started. That was it. No financial records linking Cochrane to the trades. No witnesses seeing him spread the rumors. No motive. Cochrane was already wealthy from prize money. But the trial lasted one day. The verdict: guilty. Sentence: 1 year in prison. Stripped of his naval rank. Expelled from Parliament. His name struck from the Navy list, the official record of officers. And here's the part that makes historians' blood boil. Years later, decades later, documents emerged proving Cochrane was innocent. The real conspirators confessed on their deathbeds. One even wrote a letter admitting they framed Cochrane because the government wanted him silenced. Think about that for a second. Britain's greatest naval commander, framed, imprisoned, destroyed, not by an enemy, by his own government. So what do you do when your own country betrays you? If you're Thomas Cochrane, you go to war with the world. 1817, Cochrane was released from prison. Reputation destroyed. Career over. Most men would disappear, accept defeat. Cochrane looked at a map of the world and asked himself one question: who's fighting the Spanish Empire? Because if Britain wouldn't let him fight, someone else would. Chile's independence movement sent Cochrane an offer: command our entire navy. Fight the Spanish Empire. Take whatever prize money you capture. Cochrane arrived in Chile in 1818. His navy, 4 ships, barely seaworthy, crews that had never fought a major battle. Facing them, the Spanish Pacific Fleet, dozens of warships, hundreds of years of naval dominance. Cochrane looked at those odds and smiled, because he'd spent his entire career fighting when outnumbered. Here's what he did, and this is verified by Chilean naval archives: he didn't fight the Spanish fleet head-on. He went after their flagship, the Esmeralda, 50 guns, 300 men, anchored in the most heavily defended Spanish harbor in South America, protected by shore batteries, guard boats, and 300 soldiers on the docks. Naval experts said capturing her was impossible. Cochrane said, "Watch this." November 5, 1820, midnight, Cochrane took 240 men in 14 small boats, rowed silently into Callao Harbor. They got within 50 feet before the Spanish spotted them. Alarm bells, shouting, guns firing. Cochrane's boat hit the Esmeralda's hull first. He was the first man up the side of the ship. A Spanish officer shot him point blank. The musket ball shattered his spine. Cochrane kept climbing. 15 minutes of brutal hand-to-hand combat. Cochrane, paralyzed from the waist down from his wound, was still fighting, directing his men, swinging his sword, refusing to fall. The Spanish captain watched this insane Scotsman who wouldn't die and surrendered. Let me make sure you understand what just happened. Cochrane, with 240 men in rowboats, captured the most powerful Spanish warship in the Pacific, while paralyzed, from a wound that should have killed him. Modern military academies use this raid as a textbook example of audacious leadership. But here's what makes this legendary: that wasn't even the craziest thing he did in South America. Over the next 3 years, Cochrane captured or destroyed the entire Spanish Pacific Fleet, broke Spain's 300-year control of South American waters, invented naval blockade tactics that are still used today. But the part that makes this absolutely insane: he did it all with 4 ships. 4 ships against the Spanish Empire. Chile won its independence largely because of Cochrane. They made him a national hero, the liberator of Chile. Then Peru hired him. Then Brazil hired him. One man, freeing 3 countries. And Britain watched their disgraced captain become the most famous admiral in the world, and they hated it. But what happened next? That's when this story goes from inspiring to tragic. 1825, Cochrane had spent nearly a decade as a mercenary admiral, freed 3 countries, made a fortune in prize money, built a reputation that terrified every navy that faced him. But here's what historians found in his personal letters kept at the British Library. He wanted to go home. He missed Britain, missed his family. He'd proven himself 100 times over. Surely, they'd forgive him now. Cochrane petitioned Parliament for a royal pardon. He submitted testimonials from Chilean, Peruvian, and Brazilian governments, proof of his innocence in the stock fraud case, confessions from the actual conspirators. The response: denied. He petitioned again in 1830. Denied. 1832. Denied. For 27 years, the British government refused to clear his name. Here's what makes this absolutely devastating. Britain didn't deny his pardon because they thought he was guilty. Documents released in the 1900s prove the government knew he was innocent as early as 1816. They refused to pardon him because he'd embarrassed them. He'd exposed their corruption. He'd shown the world that Britain didn't need its aristocratic admirals. They just needed someone brave enough to fight. 1847, Cochrane was 72 years old, and the British Navy finally gave him something. Not a pardon, not an apology. They made him Rear Admiral of the British Fleet. Read that again. The same Navy that stripped his rank, that erased his name from their records, that imprisoned him on false charges, now wanted him him back, because Britain was facing new enemies, and they needed their best commander. After 33 years of exile, they came crawling back. Want to know the craziest part? Cochrane accepted, not because he forgave them. His letters make that clear. He never forgave them. He accepted because even after everything, after the betrayal, the prison, the exile, he still loved the sea. But here's the final twist. The thing that makes this story legendary instead of just tragic. Because Cochrane, even at 72 years old, had one more trick up his sleeve. And it was the most dangerous weapon ever conceived in naval warfare. A weapon so terrifying Britain banned it before he could use it. So here's where we are. Cochrane is back in the Royal Navy, 75 years old. Most men his age are retired, resting. Cochrane was designing a weapon that could end wars. Not metaphorically, literally end them. Cochrane had invented chemical warfare, not the crude gas attacks of World War I, something more sophisticated, more devastating. Here's how it worked. From his own classified proposal to the British Admiralty: load ships with sulfur, charcoal, and coke. Sail them upwind of an enemy fortification. Ignite the chemicals. The resulting gas, sulfur dioxide, would drift over the enemy, suffocating them, incapacitating entire armies without firing a single shot. Cochrane tested this. British military archives, declassified in 1908, show he conducted experiments on the Scottish coast. The results? Devastating. The gas could disable men within minutes, kill within hours. And here's what makes this absolutely terrifying. Cochrane proposed using this weapon to end the Crimean War. The Russian fortress at Sevastopol, which had resisted British attacks for months, could be taken in hours with his gas weapon. Minimal British casualties. Total Russian surrender. The Admiralty read his proposal, and they were horrified, because Cochrane had created something that would change warfare forever. Not tactics, not strategy, the entire morality of war. The British government classified his weapon plans as too inhumane for civilized nations. They refused to let him use it, refused to let him even test it in combat, because they understood, if Cochrane used this weapon and it worked, every nation on Earth would build their own version. Cochrane had invented the prototype for modern chemical weapons, 70 years before World War I, and when gas was finally used in warfare, in 1915, it killed exactly the way Cochrane predicted. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, suffocated, blinded, destroyed. The British government had been right to be terrified. Thomas Cochrane died in 1860, 85 years old. The British government gave him a state funeral, full honors, naval procession, as if they'd always respected him. But here's what haunts me about Cochrane's story. In his personal papers, found after his death, was a letter, written to his son. One line stands out: "I fought for Britain my entire life. I just wish Britain had fought for me." This is why history matters, not because of battles or ships or tactics, but because Thomas Cochrane proved something that still applies today. The people who change the world, they're not the ones who follow the rules, they're the ones who rewrite them. Cochrane fought outnumbered and won, was betrayed by his own country and kept fighting, was offered redemption and still pushed boundaries, because genius doesn't ask for permission. And the truly dangerous people, they're not the ones with the biggest weapons, they're the ones with the best ideas. So here's my question for you. If you were Cochrane, after everything Britain did to him, would you have gone back? Would you have accepted that commission in 1847, or would you have told them to go to hell? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you would have done, because this question, it's not about 1800s naval warfare, it's about loyalty, integrity, when to fight and when to walk away. And if this story changed how you see what one person can accomplish, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more history that hits this hard, because next week, we're diving into the soldier who single-handedly held off an entire army for 3 days. The last stand that military historians call impossible. The battle that proved courage doesn't need an army, just one person who refuses to quit. You won't believe what happened.